For everyone with an interest in MASH, or more broadly, steatotic liver disease, Surf's Up, Season 6, Episode 10 of Surfing the MASH Tsunami, starting a new roundtable looking at major trends and events of the last 6 months, moving through the birth of America's first virtual liver clinic, and ending with the latest findings from Jobson of Predictive Health Intelligence, starts now.
This week on Surfing the MASH Tsunami.
Long story short, we can dissect treatment effects and changes in certain proteins or signaling pathways depending on weight loss and non-weight loss. And that brings us back to the whole story. What's actually the metabolically benefit the patient has with improvement, all different things, and then the long-term fibrotic effect.
Patient that happened to be in the state of Arizona, and she was waiting on her in-person appointment. We were able to get him up-licensed and in-network with her payer faster than she could wait for her in-person appointment with a hepatologist in her market. Once Al had his license and was in-network with her payer, she said, great, I'd love to have an appointment with him tomorrow.
It's striking that you could beat an in-person appointment even with a 45-day lag on insurance.
Transplant is dramatic, life-saving, etc. But when you look at cirrhosis, which is the main reason for a transplant, it is basically preventable in about 90% of cases. So the goal, I think, going forward is going to be really not to get to the point of transplant.
We did some high-risk location in a couple of regions down in the southwest, and we had 94% overall turnout. And these were high-risk patients who even the practices said they never normally turn up and engage with. It is not a bad system to go out and look for people because they're not used to the NHS coming to find them. Tripling the rate of detection, I suppose, is what we're talking about. But I don't know whether we can do that in 2 years, given capacity limitations.
Exactly. So we have to tailor it, but we also have to generate the data that means that our health systems can properly understand the problem.
For the last 5 years, MassLD stakeholders, whether manufacturers, trial sites, providers, payers, patients, or investors, have turned to surfing the MASH tsunami to keep track of drug and device development, epidemiology, public health initiatives, and practice patterns. This week, the first segment starts a new roundtable on 3 major events of the first half of 2025. Our Newsmaker interview is with LiverRight Chief Executive Officer Brandon Tudor and Chief Medical Officer Alexander Lalos, discussing the launch of the first hepatology virtual clinic in the U.S. Finally, Louise joins Roger for our expert interview with Tim Jobson of Predictive Health Intelligence, discussing the company's progress in using basic NHS medical records to identify patients at high risk of MASH or cirrhosis.
This week's sponsors for Surfing MASH include
Regeneron is a leading biotechnology company that invents, develops, and commercializes life-transforming medicines for serious diseases. Founded and led by physician scientists, their unique ability to repeatedly translate science into medicine has led to numerous approved treatments and product candidates in development, most of which were homegrown in their laboratories. They are shaping the next frontier of medicine with data-powered insights from the Regeneron Genetics Center and pioneering genetic medicine platforms, enabling them to identify innovative targets and complementary approaches to potentially treat diseases like obesity and MASH.
LiverRight and the LiverRight Scanning Network. LiverRight is America's first virtual specialty clinic for liver disease, offering adults in all 50 states video appointments and helping GI practices and health systems triage and treat the swelling numbers of patients seeking MASLD and MASH testing. LiverRight offers same-week video visits and accepts insurance. For more information, contact LiverRight. That's liver then R-I-G-H-T as if one word, at www.liverright.com.
Tawazun Health, your partner in global liver health innovation. At Tawazun Health, we specialize in providing small or large-scale access to FibroScan examinations for liver health-focused early detection, clinical trials, independent research, and collaborative projects with clinicians and FibroScan providers, now in over 30 countries around the globe. As industry-leading experts, we design and deliver high-quality FibroScan services because we know that accurate, high-quality, reliable data drives better outcomes. To learn about Tawazun Health or our sister lifestyle app, mylife365.me, click the Tawazun Health link on the Surfing MASH homepage.
First, our new roundtable discussion on major issues from the first half of 2025, Part 1. This is our semi-annual discussion where the three co-hosts, Louise, Jörn, and Roger, look at what they consider some of the major events and trends of the last 6 months. Today's discussion focuses on advances in NITs, notably in proteomics, and how these might reshape clinical trials and frontline patient diagnosis and treatment in the years to come.
Hi, this is Roger. This week's episode starts a new roundtable with Jörn, Louise, and me focusing on 3 key MASHville trends from the first half of 2025. It continues with our Newsmaker interview with Brandon Tudor and Alex Lalos of LiverRight, discussing the launch of the first virtual hepatology clinic in the U.S. and what it portends for the future of liver care. Our expert interview is with Tim Jobson, Medical Director of Predictive Health Intelligence, updating us on their Somerset project, which we discussed last year, and other activities they have identifying patients at high risk for MASH from basic NHS databases. There's a lot in here. Why don't we just get started? Our roundtable this month, and it will only be 3 episodes, so it's kind of quasi-month, are going to be our 3 co-hosts, Jörn and Louise and me, looking back at the first half of 2025 and asking what's the most important thing that happened from where each of us sit in terms of steatotic liver disease. However, first, we're going to spend a couple of minutes doing something that will be old news by the time it gets to you folks, because it will have happened a week ago. But as we sit right now, today, recording, England is in the finals of Euro 25 women's, and Germany plays Spain in the other semifinal this afternoon. So, Jörn, why is Germany going to beat Spain? And then why is Spain going to beat Germany? And Louise, how's England going to do against either of them?
Yeah, that's interesting. Hi, everyone. And it's an interesting question. I don't know. We'll be watching the game. It's actually 9 p.m. This time zone, and they've lost a lot of good players, I think, due to injury, and I'm a little worried about the performance, but sometimes the young player, when they get the chance, outperform. I think Spanish is a favorite on this match, but we can do it. I want to be matched up with England in the final.
Jörn, as I understand it, and well, actually I do understand it a little bit, the problem that the Germans have between injuries and suspensions is that their defense will be missing some key people.
That's about right, but it gives an opportunity for others to shine. So let's use it.
What I was about to say, though, is that if Spain has a weakness, it's that their defense is suspect. They're so good playing forward that you don't see them on the back line, but their defense is a tad suspect. What we're going to have is a match to see whose defense holds up better, the guys who are a little suspect in the first place, or the guys who are playing with, or women who are playing with new young people. If you had a bet, who wins?
It'll go to penalty shootout.
Okay.
And leave it open there.
Well, the England knows a little bit about penalty shootouts. I've never seen that many penalties missed in a shootout in my life, Louise.
We always beat the British in penalty shootout. That's the good news.
Not in recent years, you haven't.
That's too bad. I agree. Let's move on.
Okay. So then, Louise, how do you feel about England in the finals?
How we got there, I really do not know, because as we've said, it has been really hard. And we have scored in the last minute of full time. We've scored in the last minute of additional time added on. And we've gone on to penalty shootouts and things like that. And I felt really sorry for Italy yesterday when we scored in 90+6 when there was about 25 seconds left on the clock. But we play until the end, that's what I'll say. And we are the reigning champions. We're there I think this is our 3rd successive major final. And it's either going to be a match up for the last European finals, which we hold, which was against Germany. And I think we'd prefer Germany, and or the World Champions final, which was England versus Spain. So I think out of the two, I'll take Germany. It's got it written in the stars, Jörn. It is that old adversary and foe. And I know your girls got excited the last time the Euros were on, and now they're 4 years older. So no doubt they're enjoying it. And Germany defence were amazing the other day, and how they held out after being one player down after 13 minutes. So and then winning on penalties. You did an amazing job.
And won in a match where they were the underdog at 11-on-11.
Absolutely. But never write out Germany, I'll tell you.
Right. You can't do it. So the thing I'll say about England, and then we'll go on to the podcast, is that I believe that English women have, I know that you set the mark in the quarterfinal for the latest goal ever scored in a UEFA women's knockout match when I guess Chloe Kelly scored in the 119th minute. Yeah. And then I believe that the 90+6 goal is the latest goal ever scored in regulation time in a knockout.
They're not making it easy to watch, I tell you. But I did feel sorry.
And by the way, when you went to a penalty shootout, the shootout went 7 rounds because you guys kept missing shots.
Well, apparently 50% of all penalties in this tournament have been missed, and normally it's only around about 20%. So there's something going on. Nobody can take penalties, or it's just the nerves. So I don't know.
Well, I think it's the nerves because in the Sweden match, which I watched, I've watched all of it, but in the Sweden match, the Swedes were missing their penalties. And the English women were putting them right in the hands of the keeper.
And Italy substituted 3 of their main players about 30 seconds or a minute before the game was due to end, which meant when we equalised and it went into extra time, they didn't have 3 of their strongest players, sadly. But you play to the final whistle. I've played sport for a long time and still do, and you play to the final whistle.
Yeah, and if anything, the English, not the women, but the men, know better than anybody that you don't substitute 3 players 119 minutes into a match that's going to penalty shootouts.
Or right? 90 plus 5 minutes of extra time. Yeah, added on to it before we got there.
Southgate, in the UEFA men's final, Southgate substituted like 118 or 119 and put on Sancho and Saka and Rashford, and they all missed. Right. That's how you lost. Women are smarter than that. They know who to put on the
Right. Can we just phrase that and put it on as the title for the entire podcast? Women are smarter than that.
In fact, we'll do that for the entire series. The theme for this year will be women are smarter than that. I like it. So with that, that's groundbreaker number 1. That's the groundbreaker number 2, which is good personal and professional news in the last week or 2. Jörn, you got to go first because Louise is away from her camera right now.
I realize my highlight will be ready for a short summer break. I'll take off a week or 10 days going to Italy and the Black Forest. So once the podcast drops, I'll be enjoying a few days off.
Okay.
Wonderful. That's excellent.
Louise, good news, personal, professional?
Well, my good news is I participated in the World Rowing Championships for the St. Iles skiff rowing boats. They're about 14 feet long. They weigh about 183 kilos, and there's 4 of us rowing and somebody sitting coxing. And I obviously do this in Perth, but we took an Australian team to Stranraer in Scotland, and they threw every bit of weather at us and the rough sea. And we celebrated when we didn't come last because the Aussies are new to this and they compete every single week and things during the year. And the Dutch do very, very well. There's a very, very strong Dutch contingent. But we represented Australia and doing a 2-kilometre sprint in a very heavy rowboat. After that, if I could have got out of the boat in 250 metres and swam home, I would have done a couple of times, but my lungs were going for it. But get me to 1,200 metres and carry on because you're in that flow. But it was a very, very great fun, great experience. And the whole thing is about communities building their own wooden boats and then sailing them as communities. And it's great exercise. A lot of the people are old and older. So the people I row with are usually in their 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s. And I think it's one of those sports that is very good for exercise. It's very good for team partnership. And it's also a community issue. So I was thinking, be great to see a NAFLD or MASLD team in different communities do these sort of things, because it's never too late and it's supple. So that was my personal highlight. And we didn't come last, but we weren't the highest international team. I think that was one of the only 3 teams from America and one of the only 3 teams in America. So that was good. And my professional highlight is community primary care clinics are full at the moment and 95% turnout. So when they're fully booked, that means very little time to do things. And at the moment, we just scanned somebody today who found out and booked on Friday. So we're turning around quite rapid, non-invasive diagnostics. If you're going to locate people, we want to be able to give them information as quickly as possible and start to triage them already in the community service area rather than wait. So
let me ask you one more question. That might be good professional news and not this week over time. How many countries is My Life 365 in right now?
MyLife365.me is in 34 countries now, because we've just launched the app in Qatar, Belgium, and I can't remember the other one this month, but we've got Greece, we've got Italy, we've got Spain, we've got Germany, and it's for people who are probably never going to get to liver hepatologists, and we don't want them to get there. So if we intervene in poor liver health at an early stage, actually what we're seeing in the dynamics is that where they self-rate their own behaviour, they reduce their fatty liver. But also, these people, when they go back to their previous behaviour, their steatotic liver returns. So it would be great to know, and Jörn probably knows a lot more about this, whether this phenotype of people who can reverse it, do they all rebound if they change the behaviour, or can they reverse it? And are there phenotypes that will reverse and stay despite their behaviours? So I don't know. Question.
So I guess my personal is I'm celebrating a birthday later this week. Now, by the time this airs, I will already be a year older than I am today. Or I'll be 2 weeks older than I am today, but I will have crossed one more threshold, more accurately. As I was saying before we came on, we started with parties last night, and we'll go with parties all the way through the weekend, because when you get over 70 and you're capable of partying 5 nights in a row, you do that because by your next birthday, you don't know what you'll be capable of anymore. I stay in shape, so I think that'll turn out all right. Professionally, I think our good news is that we have a new sponsor this week, which is Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, who's got some interesting programs going on in the area. We won't be talking about any of their programs this year, but they'll be sponsoring episodes from here to the end of the year, and that makes 5. One of them I can't talk about this week because of what the subject matter is. And obviously Towson and Summit and LiverRight and Regeneron and another drug company, and more people are calling us and saying, can we sponsor? So we have enough funding right now to go at least into January. If nobody gives us any more money, then we get into people's 2026 budgets, and we're negotiating for more 2025 money. So life is good. We might have to do this more often, folks. Might have to hang out disreputably more and more. With that, why don't we dive into our episode? If you live in the States, certainly 2025 has been a fascinating year, but I think it's been a fascinating year for the liver community around the world. We've already talked about some of these things in earlier episodes, but what we're each going to do today is take a few minutes and talk about what we think from our own vantage points are the most important or interesting thing that's happened in the world of steatotic liver disease in the first 6 months of the year. And then we'll go back and talk about what we think will be the most important thing to happen in the second 6 months of the year.
Great, Roger. Let me take a start, if you agree, Louise. And I think last time we talked a little bit about the looming approval of resmetirom by EMA, which will make resmetirom available in Germany soon. So I'd like to switch gears and think about the biomarkers again, which, is the one big unmet need area where we have to be better and diagnose patients, treat the right patients, treat. How long do we treat? And if you look at the AASLD guidelines released, we don't really know. We'll say it's a safe drug. We'll treat for a long time, 6, 12 months, and then reassess. So talking about biomarkers, there's not looking back 6 months, but only 2 days. There's 2 exciting publications I'd like to highlight. One was published in Nature Medicine on July 21st. First author is Maximilian Jara. He works with Novo Nordisk. Something they did is go back to the phase 2 SEMA study and run proteomics in the entire phase 2 study, dissecting the biomarker panel of an aptamer-based test, the Soma logic test, which provides, with more than 4,297 proteins. The strength of those proteomic analyses are obviously they dig much deeper and have more different signals versus just reading an ALT, FibroScan, and FIB4, let's say, was what we base on our treatment recommendations for now. So in that paper, which is again published online July 21st, there are additional cohorts that are explored, cross-sectional data, some animal models, and something interesting they do is they do some sort of modeling, mediation analysis to try to dissect how much of the semaglutide-induced treatment effect is actually weight-dependent versus weight-independent. Now, that's a statistically modeling, and there is probably an error margin to that if you talk about the biological efficacy. But something that comes out very clearly, there's a strong effect of weight loss on MASH resolution and hepatic steatosis, and the effect on hepatic fibrosis through that model is much lower. And they can actually pair that with a Soma logic proteomic signals, narrowing it down to around 11 proteins out of those 4,900 that change weight loss independent in patients that improve fibrosis. Backed up by animal data and existing data, long story short, I think we'll see drug treatment effects can be monitored by more advanced technologies, proteomics, and we can dissect treatment effects and changes in certain proteins or signaling pathways depending on weight loss and non-weight loss. And that brings us back in the whole story, what's actually the metabolically benefit the patient has with improvement, all different things, and then the long-term fibrotic effect. So I found this bit was particularly interesting and fascinating. And while I might not be able to recapitulate as well on the podcast here in a few words, I'd like to invite you to go to the original paper, which we can probably link, Roger, and take a look. It's a good story.
Excellent. Now, you said there were two papers?
Well, the second one, which I published in JHEP Reports, kind of builds on that because we went back to the Step 1 and Step 2 trials, which is the semaglutide obesity studies, and took the Somologic panel and trialed the proteomic signatures in that obesity population, which was never designed to have a liver study or liver phenotype. But going back post hoc, you can see that there's an amount of patients that do have an inflammatory liver phenotype as expected based on proteomic signatures. And by treatment with sema, you can actually decrease that. And here you take this proteomics out of the liver population, apply it to an obesity trial, and still see a treatment response that's reflective of improving liver disease. And I think that's, while indirect, a good way how to apply these proteomic technologies, and actually one way if proteomics would be available in clinics to actually monitor patients with regards to treatment response or maybe effect sizes. And we're talking beyond the biopsy, right?
First of all, that's fantastic and rather remarkably exciting story. I want to go back to your hypothetical in the last sentence, which if proteomics were in the clinic, clearly this will help in drug trials and understanding what we're proving. Will it play out in the clinic? How will it play out in the clinic? How long do you think it might take to get there?
I don't have a clear-cut answer. And the way of financing behind diagnostics in the U.S. plays different than in Germany. But if I would able to buy a test to determine if a patient A responds to a specific treatment, you could plan differently instead of try and error. So the way I see it, currently we have two classes of drugs for the treatment of MASH with fibrosis that are broadly categorized into weight neutral and weight reducing drugs. And if you move past the mechanism, we can use drugs that reduce body weight and the ones that are more towards the inflammatory fibrotic pathways, if you'd like, and have a more direct liver effect, but not as much weight loss dependent effect. And if I have tests to tell me that certain signatures in a patient are, say, more active or more dominant, I could more specifically select the treatment when the patient is sitting in front of me. A situation we have in clinics in the US in particular today is a patient comes in on a GLP-1 low dose or older regimen. The question is, do I increase the dose in the future once GLP-1 is improved for liver disease, or do I add a more weight neutral drug because he's already on a GLP-1, let's say resmetirom? And if I had a test that would tell me a little bit about how to select those patients, that would be great. And if I then have a test to monitor how that aspect of the disease improves, that would be another way where I could see proteomics or, let's say, some biomarker that moves into the field helps me here.
Interesting. Louise, go ahead. Your questions, thoughts?
I think all of the move to precision medicine is very, very beneficial. And I think, yes, how would we implement it in a clinic? What does it do for a patient? Because again, patients aren't often, their boat is not floated by just pure results. It's about getting them engaged in their care. And a lot of that depends on the type of physicians that they see and their interactions. But I think being able to rule out and to rule in when somebody's not responding to a medication is vital, because if we can take them off it and get them onto a medication that is more suited for them, that's wonderful. Because again, it's a combination of everything. It is their lifestyle, it is their genetics, it is knowing that those drugs are working, because we do not want to expose people to medications they don't need or aren't really responding to. So I think obviously that will be based on mass. We do know that we've got the mass of a population of 1 in 3 of the adults in the globe affected by steatotic liver disease. A lot of those won't ever progress to treatment. So can we make it cost effective? Can we put it into a clinic whereby it supplements the care and the treatment and support that they're already receiving? I would want that for all of our patients, so that we can discuss the option, the best available, and also the option of, if it's not working for you, we will know, or we can find out. Is way better conversation than just keep flogging it. So going more to precision medicine with the proteomics is very exciting.
I couldn't agree more. First of all, 2 weeks before this episode gets posted, we have Jörn and Sven Franke talking about the idea that basically you're talking about here, Jörn, which is that you're treating on 2 different paths. The path that's about fibrosis might be a different path than the path that's about other different effects on the liver that matter. And I think Sven raised that point in the context of PPARs in the conversation that was posted recently. And then we wound up talking about FGF21 and a couple of other things. Number one, anything that enables us to do a better job of being granular about that will be valuable to patients and healthcare systems and economics and everything else. What I'm wondering is, people try to figure out the most efficient way to deliver precision in the clinic. I wonder, for example, if epigenetics might be a different way to get to this path, because I know that people are developing epigenetic tests at a cost structure that would allow them to be used in the clinic, on the day that they land, which might be 3 to 5 years from now, but on the day that they land. So I'm wondering the degree to which we can cross over from one form of omics to another and have the ability to touch this kind of an issue. That's a blind question. I have no clue what the answer is. It may be a better idea to get an expert interview on the back of this conversation where someone can talk about that. But let me just throw it out, Jörn, and see if you have anything to lend on that.
I mean, the more complex the market gets, the more difficult the interpretation in clinics will be. So for physicians, in the end, we're simple animals. You want an answer that's straightforward, black and white, which is never black and white, but that's the way we interpret tests. We want to make a clinical decision based on the result of a test. So if it becomes more complex and it has to be integrated, we might need some AI algorithm to help us to make a quick decision in clinics. So I think a lot of it is still in the research arena, and the 2 papers I'm referring to, I mean, totally in that field too, right? So a non-approved test explored post hoc in a phase 2 trial, but it shows you that there are signatures, and epigenetics are clearly going to factor into that if we can use it and apply it to a patient's question and use it to determine treatment. I mean, the nice thing is we will have choice very soon, even in Europe, I think. If you think outside of this field, talking about oncology, there's a first-line therapy you treat until failure, then you switch to second-line therapy. It's pretty straightforward. Here, with the metabolic disease, we're talking about different organs, different severities of manifestation, might have renal impairment, or maybe not quite yet, but F3. How do I combine this in the treatment regimen? Do I want more weight loss, or do I want more liver-centric anti-fibrotic activity? Don't care so much about weight loss. I think the complexity of the patient is much higher, and you could, if that's supported by biomarkers and proteomics, and maybe that's the wish box, that I do want the perfect biomarker to tell me everything. It's not going to happen, but it will be supplemented with my clinical impression of the patient, and then choose the right treatment.
So let's go back to your metaphor with oncology for a second, right? At this point in time, most oncology first-line therapies are multi-agents because they're trying to attack multiple different facets of the same problem at the same time. And the more sophisticated our understanding of tumors get, the better we're able to target and hone in on what to do first. So my question, I guess, is why wouldn't the default become to start by hitting both at once? Why wouldn't first-line therapy become one agent that's primarily about weight management and second about liver management, at least until you get to a point where you've got a incretin that deals with glucagon and therefore maybe has the ability to do at least some of both?
And it might well be, because, again, as I said, there will be patients coming in on those treatments, and additional medications will be added for the liver phenotype because they have residual disease. Might well be that we're doing combination treatments. However, there are no studies that actually explore this. There's very little data to support this. So to recap, I think in real life we'll combine. There are no data to support this at this point. I think oncology, maybe the comparison is not very good because obviously the field has much more evolved in terms of clinical studies and the amount of data that's been generated in those combinations. And there you actually, you look at the tissue, you personalize treatment based on certain tumor characteristics or biomarkers. And it's really reality in that field. If we could get there based on proteomics or some additional tests in MASH, I'd be very happy for my patients.
I think in oncology, even, I think it depends on the tumor type. There's still tumor types, most tumor types, right? First-line therapy or multiple chemos at once. Certain tumor types, you go straight to PD-1 or some kind of biologic therapy. But a lot of tumor types, you just start with a basic multi-chemo regimen because it's the most efficient thing to do first.
In today's Newsmakers segment, LiverRight CEO Brandon Tudor and Chief Medical Officer Alex Lalos discuss the formation and early days of America's first virtual hepatology clinic. They share some instructive, evocative case stories and describe ways that a virtual clinic might provide superior care and patient experience. Please note, our executive producer and co-host, Roger Green, is a paid advisor to LiverRight.
So this week, our Newsmaker interview is with Brandon Tudor, Chief Executive Officer, and Al Lalos, Chief Medical Officer of LiverRight. Now, acknowledging up front, I'm an advisor to the company. Take that into account as listening. These folks are in the middle of launching America's first virtual hepatology clinic. And what I hope we could do in this interview is talk about what it takes to do that and what the critical success factors are likely to be in terms of implementing and executing with Brandon. And then with Al, a little bit about why, as a hepatologist, he decided to make this the next step in his career path. So first of all, let me say hi to both of you. Brandon, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm great. And we're thrilled to have you as an advisor, Roger.
Well, thank you. I'm thrilled to have you on podcast. So we're even. Al, how are you today?
I'm doing good, and it's good to see both of you.
Now, we've had Al on the podcast already, Brandon, but not you. So do me a favor, take a minute or two, do our audience a favor, really. Take a minute or two and share with everybody your background and how you came to be doing what you're doing today.
Sure. Well, I started, it's been over 20 years ago now, in healthcare operations, actually at the system where I met our co-founder, Pete, MedStar Health in the DC and Baltimore area, and eventually evolved into hospital operations. Most of my career has been in the inpatient rehab world, most recently helping open and run inpatient rehab hospitals around the country. But early in my career, my focus was on healthcare access. And I know that's one of the things that we early on talked about with hepatology is when we looked at this area of healthcare, one of the first things we did was secret shopped some of the markets and quickly saw that there is a huge access issue for patients who need this type of care. And thus, we saw a huge opportunity. That's something that I've worked on in my healthcare career from early days onward. As we know, if we can't get a patient seen, we can't do our jobs. So that's why we're here.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward. And then do me a favor, one more thing. One thing about you that people listening wouldn't know if we didn't tell them, something unusual or a little different about you.
I'll give you two things. So I spent a lot of my childhood in hospitals. I had a tumor removed from my spine when I was a baby. I don't remember it, but I remember going to the doctor's office a lot, and thus probably started sort of my healthcare journey. In college, I participated in a cross-country cycling event. That's probably not a shocker to you. You hear me talk about cycling all the time, and I'm still an avid cyclist. But the cross-country event was a fundraiser for people with developmental disabilities. For me, I didn't know that I would be able to participate in things like that, having some of the complications I had early on, but it was a lot of fun, and it's actually part of what led me back into healthcare as a career, because the first hospital I worked at was the location for the adaptive sports programs in the greater DC area, and that was really motivating to me. So I was actually looking for a job in business development and found a job in business development in healthcare.
Okay. Fantastic. So with that, why don't we get started? Brandon, going back to what motivated you to launch in this area, what was it about hepatology that led you to secret shop or explore it with Pete in the first place?
Well, as you know, Pete, our co-founder, has some experience in virtual clinics in his past. As we both left our previous employer, we kept in touch, and I did my thing, he did his thing. He was very involved in a number of virtual clinics, and he started talking the idea to me that led us to secret shop it. That led us to start talking to a lot of folks in the industry, you being one of them. What was also very interesting to me, and I even had this conversation with a colleague yesterday, is liver disease is sort of having its moment, right? It's all in the news, it's all in the literature these days, but it's not necessarily in people's homes and in their day-to-day conversation. I think it's increasingly becoming so, but as we started talking the idea to friends and former colleagues, it was really interesting to me how many people came out of the woodwork and said things like, my mother or father had some form of liver disease, or, my sister or brother passed away from liver disease. And I quickly realized that it is a much bigger concern than maybe what we in the healthcare world are making of it just now. And so, again, there's a huge need and growing that just continues to grow day over day.
Certainly. I think that's exactly right. So at that point, you folks secret shopped it. You formed LiverRight. You talked to a bunch of people, including Al and me, bunches of people, and off you went. What so far have been the areas where you feel LiverRight has had the greatest success? What have you been working on, and what do you think are the keys on getting it ready to actually treat patients?
Yeah, and I guess it shouldn't go without saying that when we secret shopped it, the appointment that I could get in my hometown was 5 months out. And to me, that is the greatest accomplishment, and it's a great accomplishment for a lot of virtual clinics in being able to deliver same-week visits. It's probably not a surprise to you that most of our patients that are starting to come to us, and we incorporated the beginning of this calendar year, but we just went live with our own direct channel in the past couple of months. And patients are coming to us from a variety of places, variety of states. They're booking within 1 to 3 days out generally, and the most common hour for booking is 5 p.m., right? So again, access is critical, and more unique access than what was traditionally provided in an in-person footprint, right? The 9 to 5 physician's office is challenging for many people. Not only the comfort of someone's own home, but the ability to work a full day, not have to take a half day off to go to a doctor's appointment, maybe meet some of their other family needs that they have that day, and still get 30 minutes with Dr. Lalos here is very different. Right. And I will say also another unique thing, and maybe Al wants to talk about this a little bit more because he shared it with me after a physician appointment that he had recently, or patient appointment he had recently, is that he had a patient that happened to be in the state of Arizona. I remember this vividly, and she was waiting on her in-person appointment. We were able to get him up licensed and in network with her payer faster than she could wait for her in-person appointment with a hepatologist in her market. So we were able to reach back out to her once Al had his license and was in network with her payer. And she said, great, I'd love to have an appointment with him tomorrow. And he saw her.
How long did it actually take to get Al up and licensed and into network?
Well, in that case, for Arizona, it was pretty quickly through up licensure, a few weeks there, and then a couple of months on some insurances. This insurance specifically took maybe 45 days. I think her appointment was a good 4 or 5 months out from the time that she was hospitalized. Even though we want to, and we intend to have visits available for all payers, all states within the same week, as we were ramping up, we were still able to beat the current state of care, which is wait for an in-person appointment 4 or 5 months down the road.
Yeah, it's striking that I asked the question not knowing the answer, which proves I'm not a lawyer, but it's striking that you could beat an in-person appointment even with a 45-day lag on insurance. That brings us over to Al.
So let me just tag on to a couple of things Brandon just said. It didn't take long to get on, and we got to see the patient quicker. And more important, the patient has an appointment 3 months later with a transplant hepatologist at Mayo Clinic, which is not, not that person is not capable of taking care of her problem, but it's way out of her strike zone. That's not something that's priority for a transplant hepatologist. So not only is she waiting for care, she's going to meet a practitioner who's not really appropriately matched for her particular condition. So, there's 2 things going on. Well, there's 3 things going on. Convenience, seeing the patient quicker, and probably a better match in terms of what the patient is really seeking, and what the provider who's going to see her at Mayo Clinic is not going to be sort of the right match, in my opinion.
Well, why not?
Well, because when you go to a transplant program,
And this goes back to my career when I was a transplant hepatologist. And I'm not trying to minimize liver transplant. It's an amazing life-saving procedure. If you see a transplant patient before transplant and you see them 6 months later, it is a total cure of a terrible condition. It is remarkable and it's important. But the problem is it's very labor intensive. It's very exciting for the practitioner. So if you're a transplant hepatologist, your time is 90% that. And there's a small bit of your career at that point to see people who have early stage liver disease, the types of things that we're going to be focusing on and talking about. And I think from my own standpoint and my point in my career, I'm at the point now where I want to take care of liver disease and I want to prevent it. And I think that's where the field is going. You know, transplant is dramatic, life-saving, et cetera. But when you look at cirrhosis, which is the main reason for a transplant, it is basically preventable in about 90% of cases. You know, whether it's hepatitis C, hepatitis B, alcohol use, or obviously with MASLD now, we have some alternatives. So the goal, I think, going forward is going to be really not to get to the point of transplant. So transplant is expensive. It is exciting for the practitioner, but it's not kind of where we're going in this field. And I think we've all been to some of these conferences recently where we're getting a sense of what medicine is trying to do. And not only in liver disease, in everything. We want to prevent disease rather than treat, you know, the devastating consequences of disease.
So patient comes to you. Explain, please, how that transaction happens and ways in which it's similar to, and if any different from what she would get, in this case, she, in an in-person visit.
I think the main thing, in addition to convenience and in addition to being able to do it at home and do it quickly, we do have to separate the patients into decompensated liver disease where you have ascites, you might have jaundice, confusion, you need to see a transplant person. Those patients may not be appropriate for this type of virtual office visit. But for people who have MASLD, hepatitis C, hepatitis B, after we contact the patient, they can forward appropriate blood testing that's been done. They can forward their imaging studies to us. So when I encounter that patient, I already have a sense of what the problem is. I already have access to the information, just like any doctor would in the office. In fact, I'd have to say it might even be a little bit easier because we have a direct or virtual relationship with the patient. Then the history is very similar to what I would do in an office. The only difference, of course, is a detailed physical examination, which in a lot of cases in the non-decompensated patient, it doesn't really add a lot to the interaction on that specific day. And then we discuss what we're going to do. And I typically order blood work and perhaps imaging. And, you know, at this point, Brandon has been taking care of a lot of coordinating the post-care. We have a relationship with Quest, I believe, Brandon. And, you know, we request blood work. We send the request to the patient, and then we help them get imaging coordinated locally. So, and then we can get those results, have a follow-up visit. So it's very much like a regular office visit. It's just happening in the virtual world.
Yeah, and if I read you right, 4 months sooner. So, Brandon, what are the keys to making the back office work for everything that Al just talked about?
Well, it's not like we are using anything earth-shattering at the moment. We're using a very lightweight medical record, a great partner for us called Canvas Medical. They, have customized it with us, with Al and our other clinicians' input so that it is streamlined specifically for the type of patients that they're seeing. But like Al was describing, the patient's able to send us their labs or imaging in advance if they have, or we can, Al and our other providers will send them out for labs imaging as needed. We're able to do that via our electronic medical record, just like anyone else would be able to, and we're able to receive those results back into our electronic medical record. There is a patient portal with that electronic medical record, so the patient can see those results and they can communicate to us through the portal, but they don't have to use that portal, and that was one of the key things that we were looking for in our medical record vendor is we want to make this as easy and painless for the patient as possible. So it is a web version as well. The patient, when they join the video conference with their provider, they receive a secure link an hour before their visit and they just tap that link, whether it comes via text message or email, whatever the patient's chosen, and the app will open in a web browser, and they're able to perform the visit that way. So we really try to make it as simple as possible. Now our future goals, which we're actively working on right now, is to make it much more easy for patients to do their own self-scheduling without the interaction back and forth with us. So if they know they want to see Dr. Lalos tomorrow at 3 p.m., they can see that he's available at 3 p.m. and they can book it directly from our website. Right now, that feature is not available, but it will be. And then we want the converse available too. So for our providers, we want them to be able to do their own self-scheduling. So if Dr. Lalos knows that he has some additional availability next Tuesday and he wants to make it available to his patients, he could go to his calendar, open that up, and then it would immediately be available for patients to book. Right now, that's a manual process, but soon enough, that will be an automatic process as well.
That's great. Al, sounds like this, except for the fact that you're on the phone, it sounds fairly similar to what you would do in day-to-day practice when treating patients in offices. Are there differences or similarities for starting?
Let me tell you the advantages of it, and I will tell you that part of what excited me when Brandon and Pete, who had the idea for this, reached out to me. We didn't know each other, even though we both had come from MedStar. I had been doing virtual care in my previous position as an academic hepatologist, so it wasn't a leap of faith when they told me they wanted to do this, because for some personal reasons, I was doing half my care virtually. So I knew it would work. And this sounds crazy, but the history taking on the Zoom visit, the platform, is actually a little bit more personal than you get in the office, because in the office, I'm staring at the computer. I'm still staring at the computer here, but I'm making eye-to-eye contact with the patient because the computer is on the right side of my screen. So, when you're in the office, physically, you're looking at this computer and the patient staring off into the distance. So this, in a weird way, the history is a little bit more effective, to be honest with you. And obviously, the biggest difference is just the detailed physical exam. I can still see the patient. I can tell if they're jaundiced. I can see if they're vigorously fit, how old they are. We can do some cursory things if we want to, check for confusion, asterixis. So there are some things you can do. But the biggest difference is in a very sick patient, you do lose that physical exam. But again, that's a patient that ultimately will have to transition to face-to-face care. We're not holding this out as the right answer for every patient with a liver problem ultimately. But even if someone comes to us real sick, we can make that determination and arrange for them to meet up with someone on a face-to-face basis. So from my standpoint, it's not that much different in a person who's not really ill. And in a way, it can be even a little bit more effective.
So, Brandon, what's next?
Well, I'll just point out, like Al was saying, is that we know that we don't intend to compete with an in-person visit. If a patient needs an in-person visit, they need to be seen that way. Our goal is to decompress the current schedules that are out there and give patients faster access and access to the right level of care that they need more quickly, right? So a good example is a different patient that Al recently saw did need to be seen in person, and he was able to route that person to the right care much more quickly than if they had been waiting 4, 5, 6 months for their initial consultation to then get the care that they need. So that's really what we're excited about working towards in the future, is whether it is a partnership or a more direct working relationship with systems out there that may have hepatology and want us to help them decompress their current provider schedules. Maybe they don't have hepatology available and they want us to be their front door for hepatology so that we can treat the patients that might be going elsewhere for care. And then there are many other folks out there that are working in this world of hepatology and liver disease that know that their patients need much more specialized care than what they're receiving right now. And it's been really exciting to talk to all of your all's colleagues, right? That every time we make a connection, they recognize that there is an opportunity here. And we at LiverRight want to be able to be the solution for their need, right? It's not an all or nothing solution. It's, what current void do you have in your clinical practice that we can help support rather than, we want to be value add rather than supplanting a program that might already be in place. So for some, that might look like follow-up care. For some, that might be decompressing those schedules and taking the less acute patients, and then eventually evolving into working with providers that are in value-based care programs, right, where we can be a support to that and get the patients earlier, like Dr. Lalos mentioned. We know that there are many, many more patients that need this care and treatment. They're not aware of it yet. If we can get to them earlier, we can prevent them from a whole lot more pain and suffering in the long run.
Al, you look like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on one of the other advantages of our model. And this goes to the way the health system works. Most people, when they have a liver problem, are referred to a gastroenterologist in the community. And anyone who's had any exposure to GI knows that gastroenterologists, for the most part, perform endoscopy, and they are responsible for liver care. But because they are so overwhelmed with their endoscopy, and they obviously have very much interest in that, if you have a liver problem, that was the historic place you went, but there isn't access there. In some cases, there isn't a lot of interest in those GI groups to see patients with liver problems because either lack of expertise or just competing interests. So we're able really in the health system to offload the GI doctors of liver care, so to speak. So the other thing that we have, which we haven't talked about, we have liver physicians in our group, but we also have advanced practice personnel, nurse practitioners and physician assistants. And they are very appropriate for a lot of our initial care, and particularly when it comes to nutritional counseling and some of the more basic issues, MASL, things like that. That's what's really allowing us to provide this tremendous access. So we are convenient because we're offloading the system, and we're also expanding access because we're able to use these advanced practice providers as well for most of our diagnoses. And with our nursing officer, Elizabeth Berry, we've really put together sort of guidelines on how we're going to approach these issues. We're looking very carefully at our advanced practice providers to make sure that we're kind of going to be doing the things the same way, and then we're all trained, and we're going to appropriately match people to the level of care that is needed. So that is the second challenge of this, and I think we're off to a good start with that, actually.
What tells you that?
It's a feeling that I have in that I think that we've spent some time painstakingly going through our guidelines, and I am personally interviewing some of the advanced practice people we're bringing on, and we've been very lucky by word of mouth. We are getting people who already not only are doing GI work, but have had a significant experience in liver disease, either working with transplant groups or with large clinics as liver providers. So I just think we're getting a higher level of expertise than I even expected that we would have from the get-go. So the ramp up in terms of them seeing patients will be very, very quick.
What else should I be asking you guys about today?
Well, I think, you mentioned what's next, and I think there's a lot that's next, both in virtual care and liver disease as well. Again, we want to be able to support all of the folks that are out there working in liver disease and help them meet their goals, whether it's a physician clinic, a hospital system. Obviously, there are a lot of imaging and pharma players in liver disease world too, but Al was alluding to it, and one of the things that I'm most excited about in this change in my career over the last years is going from being in the hospital setting to being in virtual care. And not only being in virtual care, but we're in much more of a preventative world than we are in a reactive world here. Having spent so many days in the hospital, commuting to work, being in the hospital, seeing the patients that we're caring for there, and wishing that we could have gotten to them sooner, right? Over the last 20 years, I've seen a lot of those patients move from coming to us for very acute, maybe trauma reasons to lifestyle and chronic reasons that they're coming in for pretty serious healthcare needs. And now we can get in front of it. Now we have better access. We have better trained clinicians. Like Al said, he's absolutely right. I'm very impressed with the folks that are coming to us who want to work on the team. And the patients are coming to us with different questions now, which I really like. They're asking about, lifestyle. They're asking about diet and exercise. One of our PAs happens to be a registered dietitian as well. We believe that all of those things are very important in how we are caring for patients. But I'll just say personally, that is one of the more rewarding things to me to see in starting this, is that we can give folks an opportunity to get in front of something much earlier on than they otherwise would have.
Roger, can I answer the same question?
Please.
So, yeah, you would probably ask me, as I'm often asked by surveys, what is preventing you, or what do you see preventing you from doing what you want to do? And I think just to make it more clinical, I think when we've all talked about this, I know we've talked about it extensively. When you look at liver disease and metabolic associated steatotic liver disease, or what we used to call fatty liver, is going to be probably 40 to 50% of our care, I believe. There is a real challenge to get those patients evaluated for the possibility of liver damage, so-called fibrosis. One of the big impediments in hepatology in general, and one of our challenges, is getting these patients what we call elastography, which is a non-invasive test done on the liver. It's a kind of a mini ultrasound without going into detail, but it's entirely painless. And that tells you, do I have just fatty liver that's not dangerous, still a problem, but nothing dangerous, or do I have a very aggressive form that's damaging my liver? And that extends also into hepatitis C and alcohol use, et cetera. One of our challenges when patients come to us virtually is trying to coordinate that test locally. And we have to get a better sense of what the options are locally. But the other issue that we've discussed, these elastography machines, devices, whatever, there's several of them, they're just not out there in the community in the numbers that they need to be out there. I mean, there just isn't enough of these things close enough to patients. And we're not only lamenting about that, but we're talking about doing things that may be increasing the numbers. We're working with some of these device manufacturers. Can we help you get these things out in the community? So that's a real challenge. You have to identify, to provide care, you need a patient, but you have to identify who is at risk. And that is a very valuable procedure. And I think it's challenging to get that done nationwide on as many people as it needs to be done on. So we are going to have to work on that. And as you know, we have been working on that.
That's fantastic. And thanks, both of you. I think this is a good point at which to wrap up. I will note once again, because I think I have to, I am an advisor to the company, but we didn't plan this in advance. We just kind of got on and talked the way I would with anybody else we were interviewing. Al, Brandon, thanks for your time today, and good luck in the future.
Roger, thanks so much for having us.
Yep, thanks for having us, and great talk, guys.
Louise Campbell joins us for today's expert interview with Predictive Health Intelligence Medical Director, Tim Jobson. Tim updates us on progress in the Somerset NHS test program he described in an episode last year, and discusses other ways simple case record-based scanning approaches like PHI's Hepatoscope can improve identification of high-need liver patients.
So this week, our newsmaker could actually be an expert. We're having a lot of that recently. Our old friend Tim Jobson from Predictive Health Intelligence, and Louise is here with me. Tim, how are you today?
I'm good. Thank you very much, Roger. How are you?
I'm great and happy to see you. I was saying to Louise, for Spurs fans, it was tough watching the Newcastle match. For the Sonny celebration was wonderful, but Matters' non-contact knee injury was really a tough one. Other than that, life is good. Louise, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you very much. Sitting in some sun, and just for your listeners, sunny does not mean the sun, it means the player Son from Tottenham. Not a sunny farewell.
That's sunny farewell. That's been our issue, yeah. But as you point out, he's coming to Los Angeles, but he's actually easier for me to see in London than he is in LA, but we'll worry about that later. So, Tim, what's new with you? First of all, let's just do a groundbreaker. One good thing, personal, professional, that happened in the last week.
Not about the last week, but the last month. excellent cycling trip in France. Yeah, beautiful weather, beautiful food, beautiful places to stay, and then pretended to burn a bit off during the day on a bicycle. So, yeah, that worked really well, thanks.
So how much bicycling did you do?
Averaging about 40K a day. It's not dramatically huge, but just enough to get out with fun.
40K is what I do on the days I'm pushing it, so I'm really impressed. Typically, my days are more like 25 or 30 once or twice a week just for fun. Okay, Louise, what's your news for the week?
Oh, well, my news is I'm going on holiday, so I'm taking some time out for a couple of weeks. But so that's my breaker of the week.
So Louise and I will be on holiday at the same time, so we're going to be scrambling this week to get enough material in place that we can keep putting out episodes while we're both gone. I have a plan. Louise and I will talk about it later. I think it's going to work. And with that, Tim, so let's shift over to professional. You've been reporting and doing some interesting things recently. What would you like to share first?
We continue to use our case-finding search engine called hepatoSIGHT that we developed over the last few years down in Somerset, UK. And that's been a very interesting journey. So we developed a tool that allows clinicians to get their hands on the data and to find patients both for treatment and for clinical trials. It's pretty much up and running. This is kind of how we're doing business in Somerset now. So we're reaching out directly to patients and still bringing them to clinic and still finding things that are hugely beneficial for patients. And it's a game changer. So when I'm seeing people in clinic, normally it's a little bit too late. Now we're seeing a bit on the early side, so we can institute treatment, whatever the diagnosis is, whatever that liver disease is. But particularly from MASH, we've seen some great examples of people turning their lifestyle around and getting a whole lot better because we've reached out to them. And I think it changes that dynamic completely. So that's number one, using it in practice. Number two, we continue with research, and I'm collaborating with the great Louise Campbell, amongst others, on a research project. So can we look at longitudinal data, so data that already exists in all of our systems, to pull out patients at high risk of metabolic dysfunction associated steatotic liver disease at all its stages? Who can we find? When can we find them? And when can we intervene? And rather than swarm the system with every case of a little bit of excess fat storage, we can risk stratify properly and identify the right patients. So that's the hypothesis we're testing. It's great to be involved in a study. It's going well. Recruitment is going really well in Somerset. And we're reaching out to other sites now to join the study. And then the third big news is we've been funded by NHS Southwest, so that's a branch of NHS England that covers our patch of a country down in the southwest. And they have agreed to fund case-finding software right across the southwest of England. So every hospital, every hepatologist, plus also primary care physicians and primary care networks can now start to use a tool to find patients in their local area with advanced or advancing liver disease and start to try and replicate some of the work we've done, do new research projects, do new case finding for treatment and so on. So that's a fantastic news. So we convinced the powers that this was a good innovation, it was worth funding, and they've done that. So we're busily now rolling out what was a tool that covered just over 500,000 people to a population about 13 times that, 6.5 million people across the southwest of England.
That's fantastic. Will, I think, have a profound effect on tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives, if not millions of lives. That's great stuff. In the midst of all this, have you been sharing or publishing any new data about, when last we left our heroes, we had talked about, you had told us about Somerset, that was maybe a year ago. Do you have any new data that you could share with our folks and give them some insight on what it tells us?
Yeah, so new data that we've been sharing over the last 12 months or so, some solid data around the patient experience. So this is a new way of treating people in a sense. It's a bit like a screening program, but it's slightly different. You're reaching out to people and say, there's a signal there. There's some abnormalities in your blood test. Nobody's really picked up on it. Can you come to a clinic and we'll try and sort you out? So that's kind of saying to them, well, maybe somebody else could have done this sooner, but we know the system's not set up to allow that. So we wanted to measure the patient experience. What was that like? And really positive. So obviously some people were worried when they started to get a letter through the post saying, come for a review of your liver health. But the overall patient satisfaction score on a pretty objective questionnaire was 4.8 out of 5. So patients were really satisfied, really pleased that we'd done it, and we'd reached out to them. So that's great. There is some more work to do, obviously, because we've got to think about the people who didn't respond. So around 6 in 10 will respond, and some would have moved out of area, and some we won't get the letter, or it'll get drop down their priorities. But can we find out a little bit more about those who don't respond? And we've got some plans to do that. So that's one thing we've done. I think the other interesting data we've been looking at is modeling how we can help clinical trials. So taking a lot of trials in liver disease, not just MASH, but but predominantly MASH, really difficult to recruit the number of patients. Can we find patients for clinical trials? Moving away from the traditional methods of an existing database of patients who've already been biopsied, already been diagnosed, already been worked up, to the more general population. And some really exciting data saying that across a population of, say, 10 million people, we could identify enough patients to enroll in trials that will be equivalent to many tens, if not more, sites, 50 sites worth of patients to come into clinical trials. And there's a number of things we can do with that. There's really exciting additional information. We can start looking at some really good feasibility studies that actually will enable clinical trials of new therapeutics, new diagnostic approaches to get much better traction. The other thing is that people are not normally getting into studies. So people from more deprived areas, people disconnected from healthcare. We've got those people in our database. They will have more access to clinical trials. So that's really huge potential for the future.
Yeah, that's tremendously exciting. Help me for a second. If you could locate enough patients to fill 50 sites, how do you then go forward and enroll them in the trials?
That'll be very much dependent on clinical trial capacity. Say across the Southwest, we've probably got 5 or 6 sites that would normally enroll into study. So if I'm saying, well, actually, I can get you 2 times as many, 4 times as many, 5 times as many patients, we look at capacity. But if we know we can do that, and particularly starting with a decent feasibility, so we've got all the data now, so we can actually do that properly. How many patients we're actually going to recruit, and then we can scale up our capacity. So I think clinical trial sites are always going to be, it's a challenge, isn't it? You don't know how many patients you're going to get in. You don't know what the funding is going to look like going forward. So you can't just expand and hope the patients come. You need really good understanding of what's going to come. And that's in the study we're working on in Somerset at the moment. We've demonstrated how we can use risk stratification, how we can identify people, we're getting a handle on an interest rate, who's interested in out there, what proportion of the population are interested in coming and joining a study. And that will depend on the nature of the study and how intrusive it is. But you can do all that work ahead of time. And then you can say, actually, we need more, only a bigger clinical trials unit. We need more clinical trial nurses. We need, hopefully, additional investigators. So let's bring some more people into the fold. So most of the investigators in the NHS have more than one role. And we can repurpose their time to do this work. So I think going forward, it's really exciting time. Yes, you can't just flood the system because you've got to have a plan to deal with them. The other thing that we found from our experience locally is we can then phase it. So we can send batches of invitations to join a study. We can randomize the order in which we send them, but we don't send them all at once. It'd be crazy to send them all at once. Our systems would kind of implode. And that's fantastic. So you can say, okay, we've got the capacity. It's just like, it's the trial equivalent to what we're doing in clinics. In clinics, we don't flood the invites out and then put people on a waiting list. We match demand to capacity. But now that we've got the data, we've got so much more control over it. And we've got the data in a really usable form.
Louise, questions, thoughts, comments before I go on?
Oh, no, I'd echo what Tim says from the multiple projects that we've been working on in the last year, for example, not all with Tim, is that when we've reached out to patients in their community setting or through their primary care and they've been seen and located, they engage really, really well. We did some high-risk location in a couple of regions down in the Southwest. And we had 94% overall turnout. And these were high-risk patients who even the practices said they never normally turn up and engage with care. So there was something that drew them in. And I think it is not a bad system to go out and look for people because they're not used to the NHS coming to find them. They're used to this reactive to illness, not looking for an opportunity to stop you getting better. And they really engage well. And I think if we use the liver screen data, where 66% of people improve their liver health on that first interaction, then we can look at enriching the populations. We can look at two-step scanning to make sure that we don't overwhelm hepatology departments. But you also pick out the right patients for trials, because if you're going to improve 66% potentially of people's liver FibroScans, they're not going to make a trial criteria. So you've sent them through this pathway over a period of time that means they're no longer eligible following just one single scan or a set of blood tests. So I think the location and that ability to be more conducive to the person in the environment actually is beneficial, but also not overwhelming those systems, because once we go out and find these patients, we do have an obligation to give them information quite quickly. And I think certainly what Tim and I are seeing in this study is somebody can enroll on a Friday and be scanned on a Monday and get that immediate triaging and information. And I think that's the speed at which we can assist in these areas with skilled specialists. And most of them do not need to necessarily see a hepatologist, but the GP might need to look at something down the line. But it's easier, and they do engage really, really well. So Tim's right on all of those points.
And I definitely echo what Louise is saying around people changing their behaviors and changing their lifestyle. So by the time somebody is so symptomatic from their condition that they're reaching out to their GP and they've got seriously advanced liver disease at that point. And it's a massive uphill struggle to make them any better. They've got massive different symptoms. They've got multiple comorbidities. It's too late in the pathway. We know that. One of the things I think is happening is we're reaching out to people just that bit earlier. There's a signal of, isn't everybody with basal D? This isn't, 30% of the population. We're reaching out to ones who we think are progressing, and we're intervening and saying, you are on that trajectory, but you still haven't got symptoms. You still have an opportunity to change things around. That's hugely motivating. I'm seeing that in clinic. So that's number one. I think the other thing is the people who want real moment in clinics. So a middle-aged man who ran a business or ran several garages, I think it was. He had a family he looked after. He had lots of people dependent on him, but he wasn't dependent on anybody else. He said, you know what, this is the first time in forever that anybody's looking out for my health. I'm always looking out for my employees and my family and my business, and I'm looking out for everybody. I'm the caretaker, but no one's taking care of him. So that was really interesting how that's quite an emotional consultation. Man, oh man, it was interesting the way he phrased that.
That's really powerful. That's really, really powerful. I guess one of the things I'm wondering is in a centralized care system like NHS, it's pretty simple at a conceptual level to understand how all this would work. Have you given any thought to how it would work if it went into other European countries or if it went into the US?
Yeah, definitely. So thinking about Europe first, because that's where we do have CE marking. So we're regulated to be used. We're not FDA regulated as yet. So still research in North America. So the European picture is different. There are a number of countries where pretty much it's a map of the NHS, and there are some that are even more digitally enabled. Some of the smaller countries really digitally enabled, so that would be a relatively straightforward task to roll out the solution. There are other countries in Europe where it's very fragmented, and the data protection laws are even more stringent than the ones we have to deal with here. So there will be struggles. I think in the future, in the US, for example, I think the big healthcare organizations is where you start and you demonstrate the efficacy of it. The VA, for example, would be a great example where there's a huge amount of data available that could feed into risk stratification tools and risk stratification models. So that's a good starting point. And then I think you then lead the way. You show how beneficial it is to have data that can be joined up. And then over time, we will come up with the tools and the ways of doing that, whether that's about linking it to the patient identity in different ways, or whether it's just about ensuring the data sets are more interchangeable and so on. So yeah, it's not going to go everywhere straight away, but there are ways forward.
What's interesting to me is that this isn't true, I think, in the UK, but it would be in the US, that the organizations that would benefit most and most quickly from using hepatoSIGHT for trial screening are different from those that would benefit the most directly and fastest from care. Okay, VA would be a fantastic example of who would benefit from care. I would think that any integrated hospital system that had robust integrated medical records on its patients, if they had a trial capability, would be able to benefit pretty quickly from the trial function as you're describing it.
Yeah.
Am I getting that right?
Yeah. If you've got an integrated data set that goes back, 5 more years, then I think you can really unlock some of the benefits of being able to do that quickly and simply and in a customizable way. So appreciate the landscape is slightly different in the US. There are smaller organizations very focused just on clinical trials who don't have the big footprint, but I suspect there are partnership models that would start to unlock that. I
think that might be right. And there are also major universities that do clinical trial work that probably aren't having the success at identifying their patients that you're talking about. So I think the whole system could be benefited.
Yeah.
Tim, let me ask you, obviously I work between the UK and Australia, and particularly Western Australia. So you've just described rolling out to NHS Southwest, which is just over 6 million people. So the population of WA happens to be around about 6 million people. So using hepatoSIGHT within that sort of environment might be quite beneficial. We know you can roll it out. So I was doing some figures last week for another project, and there are something like 128,000 diabetics in Western Australia. So if we say that 1 in 6 of those is on a pathway to cirrhosis, which is that general consensus. Do you think something like hepatoSIGHT, 70% of WA do live within about 7 hours drive of Perth, so it's actually quite a condensed population in the nice southwest. How long do you think hepatoSIGHT would be beneficial in an environment like that to be able to pick out that big figure of diabetics, particularly on that pathway, because that's 16.7% of the diabetic population in WA are well on their road.
So the power you have is there are some people who are picked up through the standard care pathways. And I know there's a lot of focus on that. But for so many reasons, that doesn't always happen. People miss an appointment, people are not joining up. Okay, so we do it all the time. We join up, diabetes or metabolic function with liver disease. It's one of the same in our minds, but that is a universal way of thinking. So people will be slipping through the net all the time. And you're also talking huge numbers. So what you need to do initially, if you throw huge numbers into a healthcare system, A, you're not going to be very popular. But B, you're not going to get traction. You're just going to be worrying a few more of the worried, not well, but worried, a bit unwell, but not badly unwell groups. So we started from the point, okay, let's get a top slice that. Let's take the high-risk ones for which we've got capacity to treat. And yeah, that exact same argument would apply. So you're starting with things in the hundreds of thousands, and you're cutting it down, and say, actually, this is a group of people who've got an emerging signal that they can be seen, interventions, and as those new classes of drugs are coming through all the time, they're going to have some really useful treatments to get them back on track. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that we have noticed, and I guess this is very anecdotal still, but for years we've been talking about our liver disease pathways and what's the right way to assess and refer a patient through a liver disease pathway. We've been talking about that for decades. And just trying to push that message out has not been very effective. We've found that showing the way is a really good way of improving those referral pathways. So I get referrals now that look like was this what I did? No, this wasn't what I did. This is us showing whoever that is, primary care clinicians, diabetic nurses in primary care, other clinicians that work within a hospital. Oh, we get it. Okay, we start to understand what you liver doctors want to try and achieve here. And they start to follow that and follow those patterns. So that's the other really big advantage of being able to start with that pulling them towards you, pulling them into your clinics, and then people seeing the way and say, right, I get it, I see what we need to do. Which I don't think sending an algorithm on attached to an email achieves. I really don't. I've been doing it for years. I just don't think it achieves anything.
Doesn't float anybody's boat. I remember from the steatotic think tank, there was a session on about finding patients. It was particularly trial focused, and I remember Tim's arm going up and his body language when there was a comment, we don't need to find everybody with steatotic liver disease, we just have to find the right people. And it was like, we're here to looking at steatotic liver as a whole, because of course the all-cause mortality due to steatotic liver is really high, low down, not advanced fibrosis. And I think since the meeting, Maya Thiel has produced some data that blew her mind on Twitter and things like that about the amount of steatotic liver in the community because they went out looking for it. Whereas it's always been the argument about, I always use liver disease. We're only after the advanced fibrosis population. So I get this general shift, but you go out looking for anybody, but particularly the high risks. And if we find the lower risks, they get information and education. And I think that is a massive benefit from looking at the tool in the real world and actually seeing some of the responses from it. But yes, you would be part of the team looking at tripling the rate of detection, I suppose, which is what we're talking about. But I don't know whether we can do that in 2 years, given capacity limitations.
Exactly. So we have to tailor it, but we also have to generate the data that means that our health systems can properly understand the problem, because that's not happening, and the data that informs what the next study is going to look like. So what are the next drug studies going to look like? That's great and really important. Also, what are the next population health studies going to look like as well? Because I think unless you start showing that, and I think one of the things is that all of our risk assessments are about what is this patient's risk? And really, we're not talking about risk, we're talking about where are they? Yes, but we're not saying how fast are they traveling? What's their trajectory? How quickly are they going to get worse? And so that's where I think looking at a much bigger data set really helps us to do that. We can start to see who are the real ones to focus on, because it's not your here and now for necessarily. It's where you're going to be in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years time, giving a the window for intervention. And yeah, that was the response, wasn't it? It was like, we don't need to find any more patients. Well, actually we do. We've got to find the right ones, and we've got to tailor our systems, and we've got to understand what's out there, and then we've got to do the best we possibly can for all those people.
What is the difference in not having been in Barcelona? What is the difference in the paradigm that you're dealing with versus the people who say we don't need to find more patients are dealing with?
Question for me or for Louise? I think for me.
Yes, either of you. Either of you.
So hepatologists who have been trained to deal with end stage of liver disease or acute severe liver failure and so on, there are not enough of them. And there's not enough people dealing with chronic disease either. So if your perspective in life is those advanced liver disease patients, and they're taking all your time, then you're going to say, well, we've only just got enough resource to deal with the ones who are really, really sick. So here and now, those individuals don't have capacity to take on a whole tranche of preventive medicine and early identification, early intervention medicine. Ultimately, but that's what we know we need to do. So that's partly, I think, just a perspective of where hepatology has come from. Hepatology has come from a relatively small specialty because cardiac and cancer get the big money. And that's where the investment's gone. And I think we look back to some of the early, I think we go back into the 1990s, where people saying we need to intervene early with cardiovascular disease and preventive interventions and so on, and modification of risk factors and so on. And I think we're just about there in the liver world. So we're moving away from it being a super specialist area. And we still need those people doing those things because those patients are still going to be there for quite some time to come. And we need a whole new layer that is taking this out into community, intervening early, finding those patients and treating them. So I think mostly it's just a perspective thing. I think one more thing is the evolution of academic thinking. So for one recent talk I did, I dug out some papers going back, I think the earliest was 1975, talking about steatosis in the liver and how it's a completely benign condition and why would we even bother? That was 1975. And then you could just watch through the kind of narrative changing every 5 or 10 years, right through to 2005, people say, oh, this looks like it might be a major risk factor for hepatocellular carcinoma. And that's 20 years ago. And then look how it's come on since then. So that evolution of academic thinking around steatotic liver disease as well, really fascinating how that's changed. And the world's catching up.
And I think, just to follow on from Tim there, is that the world has got into more, or normal people are more into prevention. Why do I need to be sick? And I think some of that could relate back to the COVID pandemic, where you could reduce or increase your risk factors by behavioural. And it became strongly linked to behaviour, lifestyle, and certain things for COVID. I think there is a big growth in prevention, longevity medicine, internal medicine that are more holistic. And I suppose the sessions that we've recorded on multi-metabolic clinics, if hepatology deal with the more severe part of the liver and the rest of metabolic health deal with the particular metabolic sides, and we deal with it early, we may not see as much cirrhosis, but we're going to take a long time to stop the Titanic, because we are just now starting to recognize the elephant that's been in the room for an awful long time. But it was written out of the story of health. We are putting it back into the story of health now. And I think those conversations that I have when we talk about, I look more at liver health now and trying to do the upstream early diagnosis. I can talk about cirrhosis, decompensation. I can see somebody come in with pitting edema up to their armpits. I can see the whole spectrum, but I can make a very big difference way further upstream if it's somebody's lifestyle, that we can see then replicated, because we can talk about family lifestyles, we can find families at risk. And I think you see that. And I think we've seen it. We saw it in Barcelona with GPs saying that it was the one time they really felt they were interacting and making a difference to their patients when they used non-invasive tools and liver stiffness measurements and getting in with patients. And I think hepatology cannot prevent what's coming. We need to work with people, which is what I think the Steatotic think tank brought a lot of different players to the table, from the AI readers to the AI platforms that do triaging and weight loss management. It wasn't there to put us under threat. It's there to help us. Because if we can reduce and improve the outcomes of people with MASLD, to remove the risk of end-stage cirrhosis, because we know we can, then actually that is a big outcome of endocrinology, metabolic medicine, cardiometabolic. And we find too many people who've had the first heart attack, if they survive it, who've got poor liver health. And I think we need to be a little bit more proactive, but patients are really, really responsive to hepatoSIGHT tools being used to locate them on their own information. There was an issue in Australia about people having access to medical records unless you consented for it to be read for what you read it. So there's little differences and nuances in countries that might prevent some of these really innovative location tools. But most people say, why wouldn't I want to know? That's something I can change. And I think that's the key of early location with toys like hepatoSIGHT and all of the complexities of back reading. But people do want to know, and people turn out really, really high numbers. It's not the DNAs that we would see in a hospital to an appointment. I'll get comments like, if this was in a hospital, I'm not going. So you are interacting with hard to reach, more difficult to reach patients in the community where they want to be seen, or in a local clinic close to them, whether or not it's close or they want to get there. They don't want to be going to big hospitals for this if they don't need to.
And I'll just chime in on the use of data thing, if I may. So it's nearly 6 years since we've held our first public and patient forum for this. We'd already been told, no, you can't do this by the information governance people. That was fine. It wasn't going to stop us. We had to go through a process to understand how we got to a yes, and that how we need to tick all the relevant legal boxes to ensure that what we were doing was absolutely by the letter of the law. But equally, we wanted the opinion of the public. And it was just do it. Don't use our data outside the health system, whatever that health system, with the NHS in the UK or anywhere else. I think you'll get that same message. But keep the data within the health system, keep it secure and safe. Let clinicians that have the patient interest at heart use that data for the patient's interest. And that just got, that's a massive thumbs up from the patients. And we're not getting complaints about use of data. We're very public. We're very open about what we're doing. We're very clear about who can access and who can't access. Privacy notices for GP practices and all this sort of thing. That is not, I think, what people are concerned about. People occasionally don't want to know about the diagnosis, but the overwhelming majority of patients are grateful that we found them and can treat them.
You would think that would be a no-brainer. In the current environment in the States, I'm not sure it is a no-brainer, but it should be everywhere else in the world. I mean, our Secretary of Health and Human Services is in the business of generating skepticism about anything that comes out of the medical system. I'm sorry, that's an overstatement. But they're doing things to really question the quality of data and information and whether you should trust the healthcare system or not. But everywhere else in the world, I think they've got that right. And even in the States, this kind of action might help people get it right. If you gave people feedback about their own livers and then said, now, what you choose to do with that is up to you. And we're not sharing that information with your insurer, but here's some steps you might take. That might do a little better with the Gestalt in the U.S. right now. But I think it's a fascinating idea that as data centralizes, that the data that we're centralizing, even the simple stuff, has the ability to massively improve our ability to identify folks with liver issues. So what's next on your dance card, Tim? Or on the PHI dance card, as it were?
So we're in the process of rolling out and finding all of the data sources we need to stitch together across a population of 6.5 million people. We've expanded and we've got some great new help on board on the team. So it's just expanded, taken on 3 new members of the team, which is
congratulations.
Which is really good. So we're really getting into that. And as obviously as part of that, we're spreading the word across the Southwest to the people. Obviously, the funding's there. The funding for what? We didn't ask for this, so it's great. So it's having these conversations. The hepatologists are really engaged, but we're now into engaging a bigger community. So that's a really interesting time. Some potentially really great studies coming to the Southwest. So both NIH-funded and commercially sponsored studies coming to the Southwest, which I think will be great. We have an opportunity to, as we know the data in, start talking to the world about that data. It's a really big population level prevention program. So outside of national screening programs, which obviously national, this is one of the really big things in Europe, I think, that's looking at that amount of data from that many people. So we will be able to work with university partners, work with commercial partners, understand the data landscape, understand the feasibility of future studies and so on, really, really quite quickly over the next few months. Then also we will just start seeing patients at every hospital across the Southwest. There will be people who didn't know they were ill, the system didn't know they were ill, who are not ill yet, but they have something that's going to make them ill. And we can start getting them on treatment. And that's where we started 5 years ago or so. And it's going to continue. So it's really, really exciting. I think we have to prove that we can do this effectively over the next few months. And then why not just make it available across the whole of the NHS? Because the data are there. And we might as well just put it to use.
Well, that would be amazing, right? That would be
fantastic.
Simply amazing.
Yeah. And then I can retire.
Yes, you can. Well, look, we're going to be looking for
data, Tim, to analyse. You won't retire, but it'll be a stretch for the NHS.
I can't see myself retiring for a wee while. And there's so much more to do. That's great.
Yes, I misread the retirement thing when I left the NHS and set up Jobson Health to get out there. I worked twice as hard for. But yes, it frees me up. But yeah, I misread retirement.
Think of all the fun you're having. Right.
Yeah.
Think of all the fun you're having. Well, Tim, thanks so much for joining us today. And regards to everyone, all the folks you work with whom you know, and congratulations to the folks you've hired that I don't know. And I look forward to having you back in another several months and talking more about progress, because every time we talk, you've made amazing strides forward.
Thank you very much for having us today. It's been great talking again.
Our pleasure. Always. Thanks. Okay.
See you later.
And here's Roger with the episode 10 business report.
Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Let's hope that when Trump, Putin, and possibly Zelensky get together sometime in the near future, Trump does not defer. By the way, that's the G-rated word for it, to Putin, the same way he did in Helsinki in 2019.
The next 2 weeks will be an experiment.
For the next 2 weeks, Louise, Mike, and I will all be on vacation. We're pre-recording episodes for those 2 weeks, working with Daniel Lynn. Next week, we're doing a special theme we're calling Multi-Metabolic Week, which I'll describe below. The following week, we'll return to this week's roundtable, along with an interview or two. Our next major roundtable on NITs will begin after that.
Next week's episode, Multi-Metabolic Week, will be a little different.
Last week, we recorded a roundtable with physicians who lead multi-metabolic practices in the U.S. and Spain. Unfortunately, my power went out shortly before we were to begin the session, so Louise led brilliantly in my absence. Also, we have an expert interview on the same subject with Emily Andaya, so we decided to take the entire roundtable discussion and the expert interview and roll them into week 11, which we're calling Multi-Metabolic Week.
Anyone want to catch up with Roger in Paris?
I'll be attending Paris MASH and the Liver Forum meeting early in September. If you'd like to catch up on issues you believe we should cover, here are our plans for 2026, or just chat on anything you got in mind, please let me know. We'll schedule time. I arrive on September 9 in the morning. I depart on the 13th.
And that wraps up Season 6, Episode 10 of Surfing the MASH Tsunami. On behalf of the surfers, our guests, and our sponsors, Regeneron, LiverRight, and Jobson Health, thanks for joining us this week.
Please join us again next week for a one-week special we are calling Multi-Metabolic Week, including an interview with our primary care expert, Emily Ann Andaya, about the American Heart Association's CKM certification, and large portions of a roundtable with physicians working in multi-metabolic practices in the U.S. and Spain.
And until then, stay safe, surf on, and we'll see you next week on the Surfing the MASH Tsunami podcast. Bye-bye now.